This video is probably going to be pretty rough. I'm typically able to shape the direction of what I say with an outline, but I have a feeling that this video is going to run wild because the outline that I made is barely able to be contained. Normally, I would ditch an idea that feels so ineffable to me, but I feel like I need to talk about this. So here we go. If you take the act of creation from a creative person, you will break them. To do that, you don't need to pull some sort of totalitarian trick. All you have to do is lock them into a routine that doesn't leave them enough energy to waste on making anything frivolous. That is one thing that I realized that the saddest times in my life have shared, which isn't something that you could explain to a normal person who doesn't have this intense urge to create. They won't get it. You have a good job, a bit of money to go out and buy some nice things, everything's good, right? But I know that you're going to understand this because that's why you're here. You're the sort of person who has to make things. Looking back, I can see it very clearly, this deep need that I had to create. When I was 3, I had a toolkit with a real metal saw and a real metal hammer and little nails. And I would build things with it. I would go into the backyard and I don't know if the things were possible to define or identify, but I would create things. Growing up, I loved all sorts of craft kits. I loved the plaster mold kits. You would pour liquid plaster into a little mold and put a magnet in the back of it. I loved the faux stained glass kits where you would paint on these like butterfly or rainbow shaped pieces of plastic and then you would hang it up in the window and the light would shine through. I even had a marionette making kit once, real saw again. When I was a little kid, I remember being very frustrated at my inability to create things like the things that I saw and enjoyed. Once I found comic books, I decided that drawing comic books was my goal. Like being a comic book artist was what I wanted to do. I drew comic books and just generally pursued art all through junior high and high school. And for a kid, for a teenager, I was very good, but nobody suggested that I pursue it. So I didn't have the confidence in myself to say that that's what I was going to pursue. And so I didn't. That's kind of a topic for another day. In my later years of high school, I was in bands, and then in college, I was in a little industrial music project. I really enjoyed making music, and I still occasionally dabble, though I don't think that it sounds like anything that maybe most people would call music, and even fewer would call pleasant. But then in college, I took a fiction writing class. Uh, I hadn't written a story since I was in junior high. Um, and that wasn't a particularly good story. I had always been a huge reader, and in that class, I made something that at least somewhat resembled the creations of the writers that I adored so much. And that was something that I hadn't thought was possible. I thought that writing books was magic. And the funny thing is, to this day, while the process is not at all magical, sitting down and just writing and keeping at it day after day, it does still surprise me when I read through something that felt so disjointed in the creation over months and comes out as this unified effect. It truly is still magic. After that class, fiction became my obsession, creating fiction. I always had to be creating something. The wild thing is, with all of that, you would think that somebody would have recognized it and would push me in the direction of some sort of career in which I created, but nobody saw it. I started out in college with a pre-law focus, which is because I'd been pretty good at debate. It's very clear it was not a fit for me, and I studied English lit and just kind of drifted studying the things that I liked because I had a scholarship and I could get a degree, and I didn't have a plan beyond that. I myself could have looked at the fact that I was constantly trying to figure out how things were made and then reproduce them myself. That could have given me a hint into the type of work that I needed to be pursuing, but everything happened subconsciously, which is why I'm constantly preaching that you need to try to become aware of what's going on in your head, because life is going to happen anyway. So now I get to watch my son, who is 8 years old and has recorded over 1,000 songs, who makes songs in BandLab and GarageBand and just records them into voice memo, who he knows how to use digital audio workstations. He has drawn books that are multiple hundreds of pages long. um, I have tried to recruit him into playing board games for years, and only now is he able to sit down and play without, within 5 minutes, suggesting the rules of the game that he wants to make that's kind of similar to it. Speaking of, been trying to figure out the best place to record. This is where I record my board game videos, and so it's very natural for me. You can see one of my board game tables here in the background, just a card table. Got Dungeon Universalis on it. If you ever want to get a feel for how big and complex board games can be, um, that's like a third of the materials. My son has never gotten seriously into a video game that did not have a level editor, because he almost always enjoys making the level more than he enjoys playing the game. I sat him down with a Doom level editor and a YouTube tutorial series to get him to make new levels for me, to play Doom 1993, something that I'm pretty obsessed with. He has taken up the programming language of Lua to be able to program games from scratch, for the Pico 8. He is 8 years old, but he mostly wants empty journals for gifts. One year, he got a stapler long enough to make centerfold zines out of regular 8.5 by 11-inch paper, and it is one of his prized possessions. He will go on to make amazing things. I don't know what the future holds for creative people. Currently, fiction is one of the things AI really can't create, but it is eventually coming for us. AI can't currently create anything interesting in fiction. In visual art, it could be argued that the weird little mistakes that it makes can be interesting, but those weird little mistakes completely break the immersion in fiction. But even if it never is able to make anything interesting, most people read like they chew cud, wanting the same thing over and over again. And AI will eventually be able to make that. But here's the thing: while it does worry me, I'm not going to guide my son away from creative pursuits just because AI is most likely going to take over the majority of it, because I know that he needs to create things. He's a child, he's an extremely impressive child, but still, he can't make things that are on the adult level, and he recognizes this. And yet, he still creates things for hours every single day because he has to. And when I see this, I understand why my life has unfolded in the way that it has. I can see that the things that would make some people think that I was lazy or underachieving for not being able to make it as a middleman at an engineering procurement job, it makes sense. I used to feel a certain amount of self-loathing over that, but it makes perfect sense. The fact that I was able to hang in at my computer programming job for years, despite it being quite high stress, makes sense because I was making things. It wasn't what I wanted to be making, ideally, but still. So my question to you is, if someone paid you to do it, could you write a novel making it the best that you could and then hand it over to them where they would be the only person who would ever read it? Or even could you destroy it in front of them? because it's their weird kink. Do you think that answering yes or no to that question makes you more of a writer? I'll tell you what I think about it, and I'm sure you can guess from the long preamble to this. It boils down to you own your work, but you don't own the fruits of your work. You own what's inside of you and what's under your control. Writing is under your control. How it's received is not. I like to read my old writing every so often. It would make me sad to not be able to do that. But other than that, I would absolutely take the money to write a novel that no one else would ever read because I am concerned with the act of writing itself. I like being part of the conversation, but that's not the root, it's peripheral. There's a difference between wanting to write and wanting to have the title of writer. There is a difference between being a writer and wanting to have people read your work and know that you wrote it. It's fine to want those things. I don't think it typically causes harm to the pursuit of actually writing in most scenarios, because there are very few rich people who want to pay you to write a novel that only they will read, unfortunately. Although if any are watching this right now, please reach out. So usually wanting to write and wanting to be read and known as a writer, those two things complement each other rather than being mutually exclusive. I think that the problem comes in for the people who only want to be known as a writer but don't actually feel the urge to create. Like I pointed out in an earlier video, a written novel is a true status symbol. It really does impress people. So some number of people who have the identity of writer but don't write because it doesn't do anything for them. They just want to be a writer. Writing is too strenuous and takes too long for the goal of being a writer to carry you through to success. There are people who manage to write their one book and then transition to something else, but I have to think that even that is a rarity, and it mostly takes place in academia. You have to want to write for its own sake. You have to want to create fictional realities because fictional realities are the best thing that a person can create. So let me back that up. Why is it that of all of the different art forms that I have tried out, why is it that creating fiction is the one that I have stuck to and do on a daily basis, having written millions of words? You have no limitation of budget and other people's ability, like with a movie. Although I do have to admit that writing screenplays is really fun. You don't have any limitations of hardware like in a video game. The hardware is all up here and it's as powerful as it's possible to enjoy. When you're playing a video game and a character runs up to the boundary of the world, you realize that the world has boundaries because of the limited interactions that you can have with it. The world of a good writer feels infinite. It feels real when you're in it. And if it's written by a great writer, it can continue to feel that way even afterward. When I was a kid, this is why it felt like writing was impossible to me. I would fall into these worlds and I couldn't imagine being able to make them myself. Writing fiction is everything. It is world creation. It is creating people and experimenting on entire lives of maybe generations. It's being a god. It's living as any person you want to make into a character. And when you are involved in the act of making fiction, it all lives in your head, processing in the background. And I think that besides being enjoyable, to always have this creative ability with you, it also makes you a better person. Fiction has the lowest barrier to entry and the highest threshold to quality. Everyone has access to a computer. Almost no one can write anything on their computer that's worth reading, especially something fictional. Read nonfiction if you want facts. Read fiction if you want the truth. When I sit down to write, I very rarely sit down with anything to say. I put characters into an interesting scenario and then I see what happens. Because in my mind, I'm not involved, I'm not the characters, my ego gets out of the way. And these things are happening to other people. And because of that, as my subconscious mind works over something and it's not trying to defend me, I realize what I truly think. And that act of constant self-discovery, I'm sure you felt it too, and it is very addictive. If some of this didn't speak to you, then I think that you need to just stay out of fiction. I don't care if you're writing about a sparkly fae princess who falls in love with an alpha werewolf. From outside, it might look like utter trash, but on the inside, you need to be looking for the truth. I am not a religious person. I've studied a lot of religion, but I'm not a religious person. And yet, this is my religion. Creating has to matter to you. If it doesn't, then let AI do it and go do something that will make you more money in the time that we have before AI takes over everything. If, on the other hand, you feel like you need to create and you almost want to apologize for it, for not being able to hang in and do the things that most people do, for it driving you absolutely crazy, don't apologize. Don't feel weak. You do need to create. Make sure that you do everything you can to find room for creation in your life, because most people will not understand this urge. And so they won't, in their consideration of how you should form your life, make any room for the act of creation. It won't even be out of malice. They just won't understand. Which means that you are alone in doing that. And most of what other people suggest you do, most of the standard path, will reduce the amount of creative time and energy that you have until it's gone and you have nothing left to put towards these frivolous acts. And because you start getting entangled in responsibilities and certain levels of lifestyle before most people understand themselves, I don't know, this message is probably reaching you too late. Most likely you already feel this, you've already worked it out for yourself, and now you're just struggling to claw back some space for yourself. And I don't know, I guess I'm just telling you that I think that that's important. I'm Jay Allen Riker, and in my own extremely rambling way, I am reminding you to write, read, and live.